The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Stephen Sakach here with Tullio Siragusa and Ash Maher. Lately, we've been chasing the higher purpose of business like a cat to a laser pointer. Today, our quest is to explore where your purpose meets your pitch. In other words, how can you carry your company's purpose to the world and through your marketing? In the last podcast, we helped with defining and living by your purpose. Now we go from the boardroom to the billboard, taking that purpose public. So if you are starting to authentically live by that purpose with your company, let's turn that into some effective marketing. And just a note, if you hang out to the end of this podcast, we're going to talk about a tool that can help you not only come up with or refine your purpose, but can give you some creative, purpose-driven campaign ideas. Again, you don't have to have a charity or donate a percentage of your proceeds to purchases, or involve any corporate social responsibility activity. You can create an effective, emotionally connecting, purpose-driven campaign without any of that. So don't let this topic scare you off if that's kind of what you're thinking this is all about. So last episode, we slogged through some research of dull purpose statements and good purpose statements. This week, I don't know about you guys, but I kind of watched a lot of ads that were tearjerkers. It was quite the emotional roller coaster of research. Before we jump into some of those ads, why is this important? Some data real quick, Ash, on infusing our company purpose in your marketing. What's the data? What data do you have to sell this to someone who wants to sell this to their company or their marketing staff and push it in?
Absolutely. So a couple points here. Deloitte was one article I pulled up where they discuss purpose-driven companies witness higher market share gains and grow 3 times faster on average than their competitors. So as I went through this article, I found a couple excerpts here that I found really interesting. One was purpose is a core differentiator. So purpose-oriented companies have a higher productivity and growth rate, along with more satisfied workforce who stay longer with them. Our research shows that such companies report 30% higher levels of innovation and 40% higher levels of workforce retention than their competitors. Another excerpt I thought that was interesting was organizations that don't clearly articulate their purpose to their customers. Oh, I apologize. Purpose-driven businesses factor in the experiences of all humans they touch, as people want to work for and support a company whose purpose is focused on the greater good of society. So organizations that don't clearly articulate their purpose to their customers, workforce, and partners may run the risk of falling behind or falling entirely. So this one diagram here from Deloitte shows top issues consumer identify with while making decisions. They say 28% of customers care about how the company treats its own people and employees. 20% care about how the company treats the environment. 19% how the company support the communities in which it operates in. So that was all in Deloitte. Now jumping into Forbes, 89% of consumers are loyal to brands that share their values. Within this article, I found a couple excerpts that were interesting. So a groundbreaking global study analyzing the business value of brands having a well-understood purpose has revealed a strong business benefit to such purposeful brands and their companies, as consumers are 4 to 6 times more likely to buy from, trust, champion, and defend companies with a strong purpose. The strength of purpose study of 8,000 global consumers and 75 companies and brands was commissioned by a New York-based Zeno Group, the global integrated communications agency. Zeno surveyed more than 8,000 individuals across 8 markets. This is United States, Canada, United Kingdom, France, China, India, Singapore, and Malaysia. Have them rate more than 75 brands on their perceived strength of purpose. By the way, audience members, both of these articles can be found in the section that I'm sure Tullio is going to put that up there for you guys. But this was some really interesting findings, Steve.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, you got 2 different angles there. You got the one that's talking about how just effective it can be. So like 4 to 6 times more likely to buy from a company. And then there's also that other, we're talking about external sort of results coming to your company. You're reaching out to your customer base with that and they're responding really well. But then you also mentioned sort of the internal effects that this has, I think, I know there was another study that said like your much more likely to retain your employees, like it was 3 times more likely or something like that than a company without that purpose, so employees, internally, your internal stakeholders really appreciate this as something they can wrap their head around that gives them meaning. We've talked about that in the last show a bit, just how important that is versus having that job mindset, right? You've got the sort of purpose mindset. You're coming to work with this idea. So I like that. Yeah, that there's 2 different steps there. One's more of this external, one's this, internal kind of thing. Let's share some ad campaigns that really exude the purpose in one way or another. I know a lot of people think about, this purpose-driven marketing as being behind a cause, but that's not necessarily the case. Ash, what do you have there for that?
There was one ad that stood out to me, and it was something I looked at almost a decade ago. It was the Steve Jobs Think Differently ad. And why that stuck out for me is because it was during a time when I was trying to do more with my life. And I thought to myself, maybe am I crazy for trying to think, to have goals that were outside of myself in terms of my endeavors. And when I saw that ad, I watched it when Steve Jobs had just passed away. So I read his biography after he had passed. And it stuck to me because it was the one that was done in his voice. So it brought a great deal of emotion in me, but it really got me started on this path towards thinking differently and really pushing that higher conscious of thinking. So that ad, that think differently and that purpose was huge.
I found it.
All right, let's play it.
You found the article? The ad? Yeah. Yeah.
It's Steve Jobs' voice.
Oh, wow.
Hang on. Let's play it. Hang on.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Oh, gosh. Still get the same feelings.
Great. Yeah, the music on that alone is enough to get you going.
Yeah.
So it's at the very end, you see on that ad, you see their think different, right? So Tullio, how does that this ad pulls in that sort of whole concept?
This ad is just a perfect example. It's also, we've talked about this before, and I've used the Steve Jobs example as a masterful design thinker, and the amplification of empathy in play here, because who they're appealing to? They're appealing to those who think different, the creative types, the genius. Who doesn't want to be considered genius or creative? That resonates with anybody who's got emotions, right? So, and even when the product wasn't as good, perhaps, as the PC, they were the type of people who wanted to associate with that sense of belonging. So, purposefully focused on building a community, not customers. That ad was driven to attract a community of people that were dedicated to the same purpose, to making a difference, to changing the world, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of Silicon Valley adapted this. We're here to change the world. We're here to change the world. Every single founder was just mentioning that, but they were paying most of the lip service to it, right? Steve Jobs was able to masterfully attract the community that actually wanted to change the world, and they associated using the product as being part of that community. So that purpose of catering to the misfits, the crazies, the fun, creative types, the cool kids, worked extraordinarily well, because that's exactly who purchased the products and became users of the product and have stuck with it forever. I didn't discover till later how effective these campaigns were once I became an Apple user myself. And once I did, the simplicity of the technology and the sophistication of it, but yet the experience, the very human experience of it, the just made me realize, now I understand what the heck they were talking about. It just came full circle for me. And I've been a devout Apple user for years ever since, and it can never go back any other way, even if perhaps something might come up that's better, because I still feel like I'm one of the cool kids who's trying to change the world. So, that's a perfect example of purposeful driven advertising that resonates in creating a community of people that want the same thing.
And you can really think about it too. For me, what stuck out was the challenge of the status quo, something that we're doing right now with this podcast. We're challenging the status quo, right? We're trying to bring love into business. So I think it resonates for all those types of individuals. At that time, for me, the thing differently was me wanting to really push the boundaries of what I can do and accomplish in my life. And, if I had to settle for a status quo, I was like, I'm not going to do that. And Steve Jobs gave me that validation. And again, they were pushing computers, but to me, he was pushing a purpose of doing that. And that led me way past the Apple product. And to your point, Tullio, I'm also a devout Apple user for that reason. So it's amazing how it comes full circle.
Apple had that really famous 1984 ad that is like about challenging the status quo thing, where you have the woman running through this sort of dystopian future, and everything's black and white except her. She's in color, and she hurls that big sledgehammer at that, that Big Brother 1984 type screen, shattering it. So, I mean, that was a really famous commercial that the Apple almost didn't run. I think they created it for Super Bowl, and they had bought like a couple Super Bowl spots for that. And internally, some people didn't like it. And I think Jobs was like, no, we're running this. And so they ran it, and it was just like the best ad of the Super Bowl. And it was really played into, again, that, like you said, that challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some other purpose-driven ads. I think, one campaign that will always pop up whenever you're researching this topic is related to Dove. It's their Dove Real Beauty campaigns. So these have taken an approach of this empathetic approach to like self-esteem and body positivity. And so when they launched these campaigns, they got something like $150 million of free advertising from it. So it was not only like the right thing to do, right, but it was a win-win back for the company. And what I love is when companies can use their resources and their efforts to promote something positive like this, for the benefit of all. And especially in the advertising business, right? Mm-hmm. This is just it does so much damage in a way too, just to those same people, because you're constantly throwing out these idyllic pictures of people, and women are getting bombarded with this over and over. And then there's this comparison thing that happens. And you also see that on social media and how that affects, young women. And so Dove really pushed back against that, with their ad dollars. And that's a company or cause that people can get behind. They had one of these great ads on one of those was this forensic artist who was, the women would come into the room. He wouldn't look at them. They were behind a screen, and they would describe themselves to him, and he'd draw a picture of them. And then they had another woman who these women had been talking to while they were waiting. They had these other women come in and now describe the woman that you were talking to. And then they would compare the pictures. And when the women described themselves, there was just all these flaws and things like that were in there. But when the other women described them, it was just, this other depiction it was not with all these self-criticism and judgments. And it was really kind of a powerful message. And so Dove has done just a masterful job, I think, And this is why their example always comes up when you're talking about these purpose-driven ads.
They were like the original positive body self-image movement, if you think about it. They were so far ahead of the time for that, and now it's become pretty norm, but they were breaking a lot of boundaries and attracted tremendous amount of clients from that too. We're a Duff family ourselves. So, I mean, these things are effective. I did want to remind the viewers of two things that were mentioned. One, we mentioned about purpose-driven businesses. So if you haven't seen the March 5th episode, you can watch it on the blisspodcast.com, or you can listen to it on any of the major podcast platform, podcasts, Apple, Google, everywhere. That March 5th episode talks about that. And it was a fantastic episode that clarifies the importance of purpose-driven businesses.
So, Tullio, do you have any other examples or anything that comes to your mind? I've got a couple more we can go through, but yeah.
There's one that I really love, because the idea of being purpose-driven and also purpose-driven advertising also ties into, you can't just be a message. It has to tie back to the way you run your business too. And this ad really resonated because it was an insurance company, and there's basically this woman who's like a trainer, and there's a trainee who's sitting next to her, and they see this car. It's his car in the middle of a parking lot that's been lifted up by a crane and then dropped from the sky onto the ground, and the car is completely total. And the trainee's like, "Oh no, my car!" And the lady looks at him and says, "Your empathy training is now complete." and then it was like the insurance company, and it was just such a powerful way to show, like, with us, we're going to understand when you go through a loss like this. So we get it. We can put ourselves in your shoes. It was such a powerful message that our employees actually understand what that feels like. So you're going to get an empathetic employee who's going to take care of you, because what you really want when you're going through a loss like that is someone who has empathy and understands what's happening to you. So that was just such a powerful commercial. It's funny using humor, but it's just a powerful way to show, empathy at work, and ties into this idea of being more purposeful, actually caring for people and putting ourselves in their shoes. I really enjoy that particular commercial as well.
Yeah, I like that one. There's, it evokes that another emotion, like you got the shock, but then there's the humor of the whole situation too. So along with the purpose, which can be really, really powerful. There's another ad, and I don't know if you guys seen these or not, but Google has some really good ones over the years. And there's this one that's this non-English one that's called Reunion that we can't play here because, you'd be listening to audio in another language and the subtitles would be going on. So if you're just a listener, it would not work well. But it's really about these two friends that have been separated for many years. And one of the friends is talking to his daughter about his old friend who he hasn't seen forever. And then the daughter starts researching, details that she gave him to track down who this friend is. And then she gets in touch with, I think, the son of the friend over there. And all along the way of this, Google's storytelling is showing how Google was a part of this story, right? Where she's doing the research and things like that. And then you get this at the end, this reunion between the two guys, this surprise reunion. And so it promotes connection, which I love. And then, but it weaves the story of Google and how it can impact lives through that process, which I think was done really, really well. There's one that you brought up too. You mentioned, Tullio, like the insurance one. There's also that Thai life insurance one that I know you guys have all seen.
That'll make you cry. It's so good.
Yeah, so look that one up, listeners, if you can. It's a Thai life insurance unsung hero, and it's like
a mini. It's like a clip, like a mini film. It's 2.5 minutes, but it's just wonderful. Really good.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a mini film, and it's just got this great storytelling, right? I think I mentioned that Apple commercial about 1984. That was one they hired. I want to say Ridley Scott. They hired a director to direct it and come up with this story, this minute-long story. And that's really like something that hadn't really been done as well. But yeah, that great storytelling can be done. You don't need a big, huge Hollywood budget either, to do that. But like this Thai life insurance one has this story, you just follow along, you kind of get sucked into it, right? And then the message comes along, along the way. So let's dive into some of the like common pitfalls or challenges companies face when implementing some of these purpose-driven marketing ideas. How can we help people navigate these? What comes to mind for you as far as common pitfalls? Ash, you got anything that's top of mind there?
Yeah, I think the common pitfall becomes when you bring out this new purpose-driven mentality, right? You're unleashing this concept out with your employees, your company, and everything. And I think one of the challenges that pushes people back a lot of times is the challenge of change. It's that culture shift. It's when people start to stick out like a sore thumb, or clients that aren't able to fit within that new conscious state of business that we're trying to move forward with, right? So you end up running into an issue where, let's say, for example, clients that you're working with aren't purpose-driven. They don't care about your purpose. They care about how much money are you making them. Well, the question that the challenge that that business owner has is, well, Ash or Steve, Tullio, how do I deal with those kinds of clients? Well, if you are in a scenario, I guess the question, and I would love to hear from you guys both, I think the question I would ask that business owner is, how much time do you get to spend time with your family? How does your health feel? How does your rest feel? How's your state of mind and having these types of clients? And if you're telling me, hey, no, these clients take my time for my family, the time for my health, the time I get to spend with my employees to give them a better life, then that answers your question. For now, if your life is great and you're able to spend all the time with your family, your employees are happy as can be, and you're retaining clients at a 95%, and all you're working with people who are money driven, well, good for you, right? But that would be a 0.0001%. I could guarantee that if you're run by clients who are coming at you who don't care about your purpose, then that becomes a challenge, and you kind of have to go through those growing pains, because short term you might suffer, long term it could change your life and change your business and help your employees.
Now, let's just put that aside for a second. Let's assume whoever's watching doesn't care about that. Okay, let's just assume they don't.
Yeah,
you're doing a disservice to your business if you're not fully understanding what matters to your buyer, to your customer, because it's not a transaction that they're interested in. They're interested in an experience. They're interested in an outcome that has some kind of emotional tie to it, some kind of need for belonging. So in essence, if you're not doing purpose-driven type of campaign or advertising, you're actually not being effective at reaching your customers. Worse, you don't understand who your customers are fully. I'll dare say that, because if you did, then you would align your message around what matters to them, right? And to do that, you have to learn what matters to them. You have to ask questions. You have to engage. You have to be curious. And that whole process requires empathy. You can't do that without empathy. So it becomes a necessity to be effective at building a business. It's not just nice for the people. That's a nice side benefit if all you care about is the numbers, right? So even for investors or, CFO types, what have you, the business will do significantly better. And we talked about the stats. We actually spoke about them in the very first podcast we did in these series. If you haven't watched that, you can go back to the introduction where we specifically highlight the percentage of ROI of doing this kind of thing. So I dare say that a good marketer will take the time to make sure that if the brand isn't tied to some purpose, that they do some of that work, that internal work, to clean house first, to align in such a way that they can serve their customers. And by doing that, they're going to attract better customers, more customers, long-term stickiness, and higher profitability. It's a proven fact, not just a nice to have from a business point of view.
Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, that you put, and I think this should be the place for marketing, and this is why we do, is that you put the marketing kind of in charge of your authenticity in a way as a company, right? So it's not something that marketing traditionally thinks about. They want to tell the story. It's like, well, okay, if you want to tell an authentic story, you need to make sure everyone is living by this story. And that may take some time to get, your organization up to speed while you're while you're doing that, before you tell that story. So if you don't have that authenticity, then when you tell the story, it's just not, it could land flat, right? It could land pretty flat because it's like, yeah, okay, that's a good story, guys, but are you really that way? Or is this really what your brand is about? So I think that goes back to that, the whole, we've been talking about forever is just authenticity. But then there's this Simon Sinek quote too that comes to mind when you were talking about that, Tullio and Ash, was people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe, which I think you could probably take some argument with that or not, but I think it does really stick to the point, is focusing on this why. Why are you doing what you do? Come at answering that question with real empathy to it, like we originally were talking about in this section of it. Yeah, Tullio.
You made a very good point, Stephen, about the CMO's job, and they're very far and few in between CMOs that really understand that or will push for gaining acceptance that their job isn't to just market the company, but to also create a culture around their business. And that culture is both the internal culture and the external culture, really about building community, both with employees and the outside world. And so many organizations will only look for someone who can put together a campaign or who can manage the tools and, the technology behind marketing, knows the perhaps has a good relationship with the press, all valuable things in the sort of block and tackle aspects of the job, but not as effective if you haven't done the foundational work, right? Like, what do we stand for? What's our values? What is our core ideology? All things we've discussed before. And where are the holes in the organization where we're not fulfilling these ideologies that we stand for? Because we're going to go market something that's got to be true and authentic. And so there has to be a shift in organizations to begin to see the CMO as someone who's building the community, who's really their job is to be an evangelist internally and externally for what the company stands for. And it's hard. Not everybody is equipped to do it. So, there's some technologies perhaps that can facilitate that today. We'll talk about that later, but there's definitely a need to do more of that. And the companies that do it well are benefiting from it, both the people involved and the money coming in too.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to do and to do right. I think that I don't think that's probably why CMOs aren't doing it, though. I do think it's just that they don't think of this as their job, really. I don't think a lot of them, right? They're really focused on, the numbers and the ROI, and it's traditional stuff, right? That the way business has been run. But there's 10, 15 years from now, I don't know, maybe half the CMOs out there or something are really going to start focusing on this area of your why on a much regular basis. I think it's just where consciousness is evolving to, right? This is just where the workforce that's coming in is, they want more meaning. So I think there's going to be a lot of momentum toward that. So if you aren't doing it now or aren't thinking about it right now, it's definitely time to start building that authenticity into your business. And you, as the keepers and tellers of that brand story, if you're a CMO out there, you've got to be one of the torchbearers for this why of your business. Let's hop on some other areas here that are kind of pitfalls. I think one of the other ones might be a misalignment with your target audience. If you don't have that empathy, or you don't do the research on who exactly is our target audience, you might have something that has a really good intention, but just misses badly with your audience. And I think, we're in the political climate right now where that can backfire at you, pretty abruptly and badly. So I think making sure, you take that empathetic approach to exactly who your community is, right? Like you said.
And there's still people who struggle with that, Stephen, because there's still those who are just leveraging the psychographic, demographic, and those kinds of data points which doesn't really say anything about intention or what people are feeling. It just says, their age group, their propensity towards something based on some historical thing, but it doesn't speak to where people are at in their minds, right? And things are changing so quickly that what used to work a year ago may not work now, because even though the demographic is all still the same, but the sentiment, the feeling have changed and changed dramatically. So I think companies that are not adding that element of empathy and uncovering that are missing a big opportunity. So it's so important to do that. And it's a transformational process for a lot of businesses that have been used to doing it a certain way, but it's worth doing it.
I think you do have to be careful too, though. Like you said, something might change. What was popular last year might not be popular this year. I do think you have to be careful of not chasing those trends, because, one of the things I noticed when we were going through, looking at all these different empathetic ads out there and, purpose-based ads, was that, some were really good, but it felt trendy. Like it felt like the brand just hopped on a trend and then hopped off really quick. It wasn't really tied into their overall brand and something that has staying power. I think you have to, again, go back to that purpose when you're doing this, align it with your purpose. Because if it's misaligned, you're jumping on a trend, and that might be great for, a few months or a year, but that did kind of stick out to me a little bit, was just how trendy some of these commercials and things felt during that time. Did you guys feel any of that? Or
just look at that series on HBO, I think it was Silicon Valley, where you see a cameo of all these founders pitching their thing so that we could change the world, so that we could change the world. So every single one of them. You're right. It's, just because it's popular doesn't mean it's authentic.
I think that's why, as a marketer, it's so important to have that understanding of your customer avatar in conjunction with your purpose. Really understanding those deep if pain points. And when you understand the pain points, asking why, where your why comes in, as the business owner is going to solve that person's pain point. If you could connect those dots together of the avatar with your why, I think that ends up pushing your advertising forward, because then you're not looking at trends. You're looking at literally who your customer is and understanding what their pains are and why you're in business in the first place, to solve their problems, right? So I think there's a huge element of that. And if you don't have that at all, and if you're just kind of shooting, kind of throwing darts in the dark, then you're not going to get the best result. I mean, let's take, and we were talking about purpose with FedEx, their mission statement, but the fact that, when you talk about who is their customer avatar, but their mission statement was still around the shareholders. Well, why don't you just make ads for the shareholders, right? At the end of the day, you're trying to speak to the everyday residential, or really the residential consumer, the family person who needs to go deliver packages or needs packages delivered to their homes, and that's your person. That should be your mission statement. Trying to make that a better experience. So, I could rant about that all day, but I think that's really what pushes the needle forward.
I mean, don't lose sight of your value when you're doing these ads, right? Like, you mentioned FedEx, don't lose sight of your value, but there's a lot of companies like, hey, this is what we do. This is what we do really well. Yeah, we want to tie it with this other cause or something like that, but you really also need to make sure your value is in with the message that you're delivering, right? So that they see this tie-in, they see what you're bringing to the table is a little different than just putting some trendy purpose up, and some trendy cause and running with it.
You have to go beyond understanding behavior. Most of all the personas are built on the concept of understanding behaviors and behavioral patterns, and understand desire. They're two different things. The desire will drive my behavior. And really, really good marketers begin to understand the desire of the buyer. What is it that they actually desire? And it's not for the transaction of the product. They're desiring for a different kind of outcome than the product can produce. But if you can understand that, and then, as you said, Ash, you tie into it the behavioral sort of propensities, then how you market with them aligns with fulfilling the desire, not just the transaction. You have to do both. But the masterful brand marketers know this and spend a tremendous amount of time in understanding the desire of their buyer. And the desire, you have to understand their problems. You have to fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve. You have to be curious. You have to dig in a lot deeper than just the behavioral pattern, because that doesn't speak to desire.
And so it's not like something that's readily apparent in your basic KPIs, right? Is this desire? It's not something that, I guess Google Analytics, you go in there, it may tell you a lot of psychographics and things like that might tell you the story. But I think there's, that really taking that empathetic approach to understand what really is the underlying, motivating factors here. What's the outcome that the customer really wants, and then tying that into your story. I think data is really important, but you're going to have to, it's hard to get that kind of data about your customer. Tullio, what would you recommend for people to?
There's actually one simple way to do it, and the best way to incorporate empathy into your marketing really comes down to not just about focusing on improving the bottom line, but it's about building lasting relationships. If your mindset is that I want to build a relationship for the entire life of this customer and their children and their children, so you focus on generational type of relationships, kind of like what we did in the concept of the village when we all lived in a small village, right? The person selling you something, they wanted to make sure that you were all taken care of, because otherwise you lost the client for life. Possibly the reputation would be ruined and your business would be ruined. So they cared about creating lasting long-term relationship. So the context needs to shift into, how do I build long-lasting relationships? And this is why I always say, don't think about gaining customers, think about gaining community members. Because community members, you want the people to be in the community forever. And so when it's done right, a brand can build loyalty, they can improve their reputation, and ultimately customer satisfaction. It all comes into as a byproduct of focusing on the long term. And that's hard to do when you're even a public company focused on the next quarter. so balancing that becomes difficult. And in some cases, it's contradictory to the purpose of building these kinds of long-term community and relationships. The business model is contradictory to it. So that's a bigger challenge that even the brands who do it well, they manage their investors' expectations correctly as well. There's a lot to it, but if done correctly, you have a masterful outcome for sure.
Well, if you understand your community really well, that's going to kind of point you in the direction of the stories for you to tell, right? Because you're going to see how your product is or your company is impacting your customers, your community, environment, whatever it is, whatever your cause is. These are stories of real people, right? Real challenges. These are efforts where, your true authenticity can be shown, and because you're talking about real people, and this is how you helped them, and here's a real story. And that's like one of those easy ways to really dive into your purpose, is by involving that community, right? So I think understanding them on a really, personal level, instead of just some sort of abstract stats or data, that's how you're going to get to some of these stories of your purpose. What are some of any other ideas of coming up with some marketing messages without coming off as insincere or opportunistic? Anything else that on top of your minds on that area? I think of, for me, like partnering with some like-minded organizations. I think that's another area where you can, if your purpose is really aligned and you really know your purpose, you'll be like, okay, well, what other organizations do the same thing? And that's also another easy way to be sincere, right? Versus opportunistic or trendy. Another thing, and I think this one, you'll see this sometimes on like the Super Bowl commercials where it just, they kind of miss the mark sometimes, is to educate, but don't preach. Right. Sometimes you get into those ones that are just a little preachy. And I think, people are like, like Dove, I thought does a really good job of doing that educating that I'm kind of talking about. Right. It's like, here's some real examples of things, and here's what we're doing as a culture. And it's not standing up and just saying some stuff and preaching. Right. It's just showing. It's showing. It's not telling. And I think,
I think if this is one of the reasons I love classical marketing approach to things, where you challenge whether your message provokes a positive response or a neutral response or a negative response. So if the pendulum swings neutral to positive, then it's a go. But if there's a possibility that it could swing negative, then you don't do it, right? You either have something that lands positively or just kind of like, okay. But if it's like, oh, stop preaching to me, right? That's a negative. So in essence, that's not an effective campaign. And again, that's tied into being purposeful and to being empathetic, because you take the extra time and step. And as you get to know your audience and your customers, you'll know which of those things will rub them the wrong way and which one of those things will not. And it's a very intentional effort to take the extra time to actually test and validate these things. That's why I love design thinking, because you have to prototype and test these ideas to see how they land. And usually if they land neutral and positive, you got a good thing going. And that takes effort and time and energy and know-how. But it's not impossible, because there's brands that do it well.
Yeah.
And continue to do it well, but they invest in it.
And I think that investment is that consistency and being okay with things not being perfect. Just getting started and learn the storytelling efforts. You just become a better storyteller as time goes along. And as you're inking out your story, really laser down what your values are. And it's just going to get better. So really, I think what holds people back is that lack of perfection. They're perfectionists. I think we're surrounded by perfectionists in this world. And I think when the messaging is incorrect, they don't shoot the message out. And it never goes anywhere. It ends up getting tabled. And then you get busy with all the crazy things and all the daily activities and all the bottom line numbers that you have to take care of and report and so on and so forth. But if you take that time and get the message out there and keep refining it, I think then you'll start to hit the point. And to your point, Tullio, test it, keep testing until you find it.
And here's another thing. I think it takes humility too.
Yes.
Someone say, what do you mean by humility? Well, you might be the CEO of a company and you're very fixed on a particular message. Maybe it's very corporate like, we did some examples of that in a previous podcast. Yeah. You have to be humble enough to step back. And if someone's suggesting something like a CMO and it's been researched and there's proof points that actually resonate well with your end customers, and it sounds maybe a little too foofy for you, right? Because it's not technical or corporate enough. You got to be humble enough to step away from that and let the experts do their job, which is one of the other messages that Steve Jobs used to always say. We don't hire smart people so that we can tell them what to do. We hire them so they tell us what to do. So it does require some humility as well, which is sometimes a little difficult, when you have boards and it's like, so you have to be humble enough to accept that maybe your thought is just, although your gut tells you you've been doing this for 30 years, but the real data shows differently. You have to be humble enough to say, okay, I'll put my thought aside and go with the research that's proving something else.
I think as a small business, especially, you really need that little bit of humility, because you're not going to have all this. You may not have a CMO, you may not have a big, huge staff, and you're going to want to try things. And in one way, luckily, there's some easy ways you can try things. So you can go onto social media and just throw out 10 different things and see what resonates. At the same time, maybe 8 of those will be, you'll get some snark or something, but then you may, there's the humility portion that I'm talking about, but you may come across 1 or 2 that really did resonate with people. And then you just toss those other ones aside and just focus on these one or two concepts. And so you really are living in a time when you can really focus something and blast something out there really quick and get that instant feedback. So if you're a small business, you don't have to have a huge budget to try some of these things. So let's talk about that small business side. Some of the cost-effective ways that a business can do some of that. Social media is an obvious one. I think, any sort of content marketing too, like blog posts and videos. Definitely, video content. I think a lot of small businesses, some do really well because they don't have big production, right? But they can be authentically themselves and just do something really simple. And people that will resonate with people. Again, some stuff may fall flat, just move on and ignore the snark or whatever, and find the one or two things that hit and dive deep into those.
I'll find, there was one example very recently. I've been keeping my eyes on this event company that had just began in downtown Los Angeles. And the kid's message was really simple. He got in front of his phone and spoke to the desires of most individuals in that industry, and he was speaking to the DJs and producers. He said, hey, DJs and producers, you want to perform for my show? Get your butts in my event, network with their promoters, bring people to these events, and you may get a chance. He sold out his first event. He sold out his second event. And now he has an entire promotion team of aspiring producers and DJs who are all under the same purpose of, hey, in order for us to get put on, we have to put each other on. And he really, and when you look, when I've seen this kid make his videos, he's just talking. I mean, he fumbles a few times, but you could sense that there's an authenticity. He's really, his purpose is that I want to just be able to support other local artists, and I want to create a safe environment. And that's supposed to be our community. Sold out.
Yeah. And this is what we're talking about, though. Sometimes it's like, build a community around your purpose. And so this was his purpose. And he did it in just a very simple, authentic way to engage this community, right? It's just simple video. Didn't have a crew, didn't have more than everyone's got this in their pocket, their own phone, that they can suddenly build this content and build a community around that purpose. So again, that's, if you've got that purpose in mind, you can make that resonate into a community, just like you're talking about.
So let's bring that down to the 5-foot level, maybe, if we don't mind. Is there a decision or a strategy that, for example, directly influence the company's mission or purpose for you personally?
Yeah, for us, I think for sure what comes to mind is, been around that, taking that empathetic approach to digital marketing that we've been doing and trying to put more love into the system. And so our underlying ethos, our underlying purpose has always been this: build love into scalable systems, internally. This has been our purpose. And we worked on that for years before we even brought that to the world, like we're doing now even. And so, so our thought has always been, though, can we build our staff into like a trusted advisor or even like a fractional CMO? And can we easily help steer companies, to a higher purpose? And that's a difficult task to do on scale. You can do it with an individual, basis here and there, but really for us, it was like, okay, how can we scale Bliss, right? This whole concept, build love into scalable systems. How can we scale that? How can we scale humanity? And so what came along last year with generative AI is we were like, what if we just built our own chief marketing officer? Something that's both a very small business or even a marketing staff could use to help with some of these concepts that we're talking about, right? This is, like we said earlier, it's not that easy to build this into your business. So what we did is we took this Bliss approach. So for the past year, we've been in development in this artificial intelligence tool. And so goals to scale humanity, empathy through marketing. And so we call it the AI CMO, the Artificial Intelligence Chief Marketing Officer. And so at the time of this podcast, there's a wait list for the tool. We're going through beta testing, but if you're listening to this, weeks or months from now, you'll be able to just hop on and use it. This is the first conscious capitalism AI marketing tool. And I'm really proud of what our team has done here. It's the first tool that really focuses on empathetic AI marketing. And it's got about 100 tools in there, simplified down to about a dozen or so different areas. But, the reason we're doing some of this podcasting here is to help you live more authentically as a business, and then be able to use a tool like this and come up with the ideas, the purpose-driven marketing approach. So it's got a tool that has a purpose crafter tool that will walk you through a series of questions, provide you ideas about your company and your purpose statement. So if you struggle the tool we've got works really well for that. Or if you're a purpose-driven company and you have some corporate social responsibility efforts you're already doing, it has a tool that will align your causes with your charities and create campaign ideas. Or if you've got your purpose, but you want some charities to work with in some way, it's got a tool that'll help you come up with that. So it'll match charities ideas to that. So this tool was inspired by a company that was, they did great charity work, but they failed at articulating how that aligned with their business. And so we're like, okay, can we solve that problem for other businesses? So
we got to dig into the whole backstory of how this whole thing took place, Steve, the whole Bliss, the whole evolution of that. We got to dig into all of that.
Yeah, I think for sure it is. And I think we're going to do a couple podcasts on parts of this tool, I think. And what I want to do like next week is really get into this other tool that we have in there that helps people's and companies find their higher purpose and tell that story through like this emotionally connecting ad campaigns. You'll come up with ideas and you can create an ad campaigns and materials instantly based on those ideas. And I love this tool so much. We've tested it on different clients and things like that, and it's really creative. So there are so many tools in here for marketers just to help you create this emotional connection and create ad copy and images that carry your purpose through to your customers. So for us, Tullio, this was a business decision that was based on our higher purpose and mission, and trying to do that better and like I said, help scale humanity and empathy through marketing. So for everyone out there listening, get on the wait list now. But if you found this podcast, like I said, weeks or months after we originally went live, it'll be live. So go to aicmo.io. That's the website, and you can get on the wait list right now. Next week, we are going to continue this topic, how small businesses in particular can create purpose-filled campaigns. And we will use the AI CMO tool to brainstorm some ideas for us of either a purpose-related campaign or campaigns that have an emotional connection, just to show you that you don't have to have a massive brand name or huge budget to do these kinds of campaigns. Should be fun. So tune in to hear more on the next Bliss Business Podcast.